Hey guys, Dark Skeleton here, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to do the basic drafting process for a mage in the Goblins vs. Gnomes arena. I think this is something that a lot of people can benefit from simply because the better you draft your deck tends to be the better you win at arena mode. And really, in arena mode, it mostly comes down to how good your deck is. Since not everybody's playing with the same deck, a lot of it is really luck of the draw and how many legendaries you get, how good the cards you pick are. So really, you can win or lose an arena match just by going through the arena process. So by the time I pick all 30 of these cards, we've basically already won or lost this arena mode. Wow, there was some lag there, but okay, so let's go. Hey, I'm the best arena player ever, YOLO. Okay, no, though. From here, I'll go and explain each card choice. So, right here, the choice is probably obvious to you guys. Leroy Jenkins is not a very good arena card. The reason for that is that arena is about having card value and making efficient trades with your opponent. My Exna is not really that strong of a card in general, not just for arena mode, but also in constructed. For one thing, it only has 2 attacks, so it's really weak to cards like Shadow Word Pain. And secondly, it's kind of a slow card. You could argue for it. It's not bad. I think I'd probably classify it around average for legendaries. The thing is, if something else big runs into it, or they throw a little guy at it and then a big guy at it, or they throw a little guy at it and then you kill their big guy, maybe you can get a little bit of value. But overall, it's just not that great. If it gets removed before it does anything, then that's a 6-mana creature gone. It's not terrible, but the card here is almost certainly can Bloodhoof. The reason for that is if you combine the Death Rattle, then you're effectively getting 2 Chillwind Yetis for 6 mana, which is quite insane. So secondly, Judd Corsair is a card that isn't actually terrible in 1 or 2 decks, but that is in constructed. That is warriors or rogues, or maybe even paladins, that use a lot of weapons and can knock that mana cost down to 1 or 2. Usually 1 is what you want it at. Without that, it's actually a terrible card, so we don't want that. Wind Fury is a pretty weak effect, especially in Arena, because you're not trying to rush your opponent down by doing lots of damage. You're trying to get stat value. And speaking of stat value, for 2 mana, you can deal 4 damage to a random enemy minion with Flame Cannon, which makes it, by far, the best pick here. The random part of it can be controlled pretty well, but 4 damage for 2 mana is really good, and you really only care about dealing mana damage to minions. Alright, so next up, you look at these 3 cards. The choice is pretty obvious. Shield Bearer has no attack. It's not a useless card, but really, minions that are just going to die and stall the game out aren't quite as valuable as things that can actually kill creatures. As such, Shield Bearer not really the card for Arena. Dragonling Mechanic is just a poor card in general. It's got pretty weak stats. It's easy to deal with. Taking out the 2/1 is a piece of cake, and a 2/4 isn't that strong, so it's not even a great Arena card. But then on the other hand, the Ventricle Mercenary, it's got 7 attack, 6 health for 5 mana, which makes it quite a fantastic card. Actually, it's one of the top arena picks. The only downside really is that your minions cost 3 mana more, but that's not as big of a deal in arena mode since you're trying to play slower. There's not as much pressure coming at you. It's just about trading stat for stat value. Here we have 2 pretty good picks in one bag pick. The Mogoshan Warden does not have enough attack to justify it as a 4 mana minion. The 5 mana Silverhand Knight gets you 6 mana worth of stats, or 6 attack and 6 health worth of stats, rather. Spread across 2 minions. It's a lot better than the Dragonling Mechanic, which is kind of similar to it. And then we have Polymorph, which turns a enemy minion into a 1/1 sheet. Now, between these 2 cards, it's actually not entirely obvious. In some circumstances, Polymorph will be better. People like to play slower decks, and as such, being able to remove the big guys is pretty decent, but at the same time, putting down cards like Silverhand Knight allows you to pressure your opponent by having just more dudes out on the field and have more things for them to remove with their spells. And one of the cool things about it is that it's impossible to remove both spells, both creatures, with 1 spell unless that spell is Flame Strike or you have a ton of spell damage. But, I mean, like spells like Fireball, you can't do that. Between these two, I think that the Silverhand Knight is going to be slightly more consistent, so that's the one I'm going to go with. But Polymorph would not be a bad pick either. Between these, Flame Cannon and Acidic Swamp Ooze are both pretty good cards to have. The choice is not entirely obvious. Stone Tusk Boar, the problem is it's only 1/1, and isn't really going to be that strong in Arena, really in general, though. Between these two, though, it's a tough call. Acidic Swamp Ooze is one of the better 2-drop minions, but at the same time, Flame Cannon has the potential to take out something big like a 3 or 4-drop. I think I will go slightly with the Flame Cannon. Typically in a Mage deck for Arena, you want to kind of draft those Flame Strikes, which means you're playing for the later game and you're just trying to get maximum value by frying your opponent's field. And cards like Flame Cannon that can help bring you to that later game where you can Flame Strike do a lot for you. And being able to deal 4 damage instantly from your hand can be slightly better than 3 damage. Because the Battle Cry only works against several classes, which are actually pretty bad in Arena, minus Paladin. That would be Rogue and Warrior, and to a lesser extent Shaman. Shaman aren't quite as bad. The Acidic Swamp Ooze might not be necessarily the best. People are going to be picking classes like Mage, Paladin, and Druid, and I think Priest now too. So I'll go with the Flame Cannon because that really only affects one of those classes. So here we have one okay pick and 2 really good picks. The Scarlet Crusader often gets a lot of value in Arena mode. Use the Divine Shield, bash a creature in, then use it to retrade for another one. I'd consider it one of the stronger 3-drops, definitely, for Arena. Just a little bit weaker against Mage because, of course, the 1 damage ping. Now, compared to that, the Mechanical Yeti is... well, it's basically a Yeti, except it's a mech that gives each player a spare part. I wouldn't consider giving each player a spare part necessarily better or worse. It makes the game more interesting. But you can just think of this as a Yeti. Now, is a Yeti better than a Scarlet Crusader? Ooh, it's kind of a tough call. On one hand, we do need to get some early game, and on the other hand, Mechanical Yeti just has really good stats. I would say the Mechanical Yeti might be a little bit more consistent overall, just because it's big, it's beefy, it's almost certain to kill something and then still be alive. So grab that Yeti. Now, one of the cards that's actually slightly better than a Yeti even is the Water Elemental, of course, and the reason it's better because it's a class card. Generally tends to be the case. Compared to Flying Machine, which is awful, Wind Fury, not very good, you don't want it for Arena. 1 attack, you don't want that for Arena either. Booty Bay Bodyguard, the problem is only 4 health, 5 mana, not efficient, bad card. Plus, Taunt isn't nearly as important in Arena as it is in Constructed when you need to draft all those Sludge Belchers. Water Elemental, on the other hand, though, is fantastic. We'll grab that. Okay, here we have a few iffy picks. Raid Leader is pretty bad. The reason for that is we're not going to be having like 6 minions on the field. It would suck a little less in Shaman because then you could use the totems. But even then, a 2/2 minion for 3 mana is quite bad. A Kobold Geomancer. If you're going to be using a lot of spells, it has potential. If I had like 8 Flame Cannons, then, you know, I might actually be a pretty good card. 5 damage Flame Cannons, that's instantly frying a Yeti for 2 mana. But I'm going to grab the Mirror Entity. And the reason for that is that if we go into the later game, Mirror Entity has the potential to snag something big from the opponent. Forces them to play differently. They might have to play a small minion to proc the Mirror Entity. Instead of playing the big guy like they want to. And if they do play into the Mirror Entity by playing the big guy, then we get a huge advantage. Our minion gets to attack first. It's an okay card, and I'd slightly favor it over the Kobold Geomancer, but my preference would be Mirror Entity, Kobold, and then Raid Leader. These are all awful. Wisp. Yeah, it's a 0 mana minion, but that's only really good if you have a way to buff it up, like you're playing a Cenarius Druid or Power of the Wild, or even a Hobgoblin. If I had Hobgoblin, it would actually be pretty good. Magma Rager, you pretty much don't want to take that ever. It's one of the worst cards in the game. 3 mana for 1 health minion that is unprotected, has no stealth, no spell shield, no anything. It's not good, it's not worth it at all. Elven Archer, on the other hand, is still pretty iffy. Maybe average. That might be too generous. Slightly below average. It's a 1 mana 1/1, but it does allow you to deal 1 damage. In some circumstances, it's really good. Like if you're able to finish off one of your opponent's minions that they've been using to try to trade efficiently, put the guy down to 1 HP, but maybe it's like a 4-attack minion, then you can drop the Elven Archer on them and actually get some pretty good value out of it. Outside of those situations, though, it's okay. I'd consider it slightly above average as far as 1-drops go, but 1-drops aren't that important in Arena. And if you did get a 1-drop, the one you really want is Zombie Chow. Now, this is actually a pretty interesting pick. These are all cards I would consider running in a constructed priest deck. Mind Control Tech is not bad in Arena because your opponent basically has a bunch of minions and that's all they have. They might have a few spells, but basically Arena is playing a lot of minions on the field. So because they'll just be keep playing more and more minions, Mind Control Tech is actually a decent pick. Injured Blade Master is much better in Priest because obviously you can heal it up. With Mage, it's effectively a 4/3 and that's it, so it's not that spectacular. Sludge Belcher, on the other hand, is one of the best 5-drops in the game. I think that also does apply to Arena. It's just very bulky. The opponent will have to throw a lot of things into it to remove it from the field. Now, do you take Mind Control Tech or do you take Sludge Belcher? I would say you take Sludge Belcher if you're playing smart because Mind Control Tech is inconsistent. Even if you get the steal, you don't know if it's going to pick one that's good. It might give you just a 1/1 or something like that instead of giving you the Ragnaros on the field. But Sludge Belcher will always be a Sludge Belcher, so we'll take that. Wow, second legendary. That's kind of crazy, actually. So King Mukla is one of the most tempo cards in the game. A 3-mana 5/5 is actually insane. The downside, of course, is it gives the opponent 2 bananas, which they can eventually use to buff up their own minions, worth +1/+1. The thing is, Arena is a slow format, so Mukla isn't going to be as good. If we were playing like a Beast Hunter deck, King Mukla might be pretty good, and meaning constructed, of course. But here I would be very wary about actually giving your opponent bananas, because that does allow for efficient trades. And although Mage is one of the classes that can deal with efficient trades well, in that if they put a minion at 1 HP, you can always use your hero power to ping and kill it. But still, not a fan of that battle cry effect. Lorewalker Cho is interesting. The thing is, it doesn't really do anything on its own, and the problem is, Arena is a very minion-focused format. So there aren't going to be many spells that actually get played. They're not going to use spells to remove this. They're not going to give you free spells. They're just going to play minions and kill it. So effectively, it's going to do nothing. It's actually quite bad on Arena. Harrison Jones, on the other hand, is a very good card against decks that run weapons. You will run into some Paladins, and Paladins always draft True Silver Champion. So if they play True Silver Champion and you have Harrison Jones in the hand, you kill the True Silver and draw a card. And that can be quite good. So against some classes, Harrison Jones is actually a good play. Against other classes, it's still a 5/4, which isn't the worst thing in the world. But yeah, it'll be really good against those Paladins, which there's a lot of, and they always have a True Silver. Or they might also have Muster for Battle. That's another one they like to draft. That would be almost even better in a way, because they'll swing once with their Light's Justice, and then you Harrison to draw 3 cards, which is very, very nice. Here we have a few very mediocre cards. Salty Dog is bad because it only has 4 health. If you were playing a very aggressive Pirates deck, which is obviously what it was intended for since it's a pirate, then the 7 damage might actually be able to come into play. But in Arena, not a chance. You want to stay away from Salty Dog in almost all circumstances. Dalaran Mage, on the other hand, is still bad because it only has 1 attack. Spell damage isn't as important in Arena mode because you don't have the spells to back it up. But Duplicate is an okay card. Basically, it'll allow you to refresh your hand. It's an alternate version of Arcane Intellect. And if you can get it to proc on something really good, like a Sludge Belcher, then that can actually work out quite well for you. So this is an average card, maybe slightly above average even. You can think of it as card draw. So here we have Zombie Chow, which is freaking amazing in Arena. Just because of its stats, the drawback doesn't matter. You're not trying to rush your opponent down at all. Stone Tusk Boar is bad. Obviously, why would you take 1/1 when you can take a 2/3? And Cone of Cold is surprisingly okay, especially if you have some spell damage. 2 damaged Cone of Colds have actually ruined me in the past. But I can't rely on that to happen. I can rely on Zombie Chow to be good for its stats value. If you get that on turn 1, you're golden. It's going to do something good for you. At least force your opponent to stall if they don't have any better plays. So we'll take a Zombie Chow, happily. Here we have, well, Worgen Infiltrator's okay. Icelands is pretty bad because it's not a combo deck. We're not trying to burst them with a Frostbolt and double Icelands like in Constructed. We don't have Antonitis, so yeah, you don't take Icelands pretty much ever. And Flesh Eating Ghoul is maybe a little bit better in Arena than it is in Constructed, just because there's minions dying left and right, making trades. And if you can make it like a 5-3, it's not bad. The problem is, you can't really consistently do that, so I don't know if that's the one to go for. Instead, I think I would favor the Worgen Infiltrator here, because you can drop that down on turn 1, and then for the next few turns, if your opponent puts anything down with 2 or even 3 HP, considering you have the Mage hero power, then you can just make a trade, get rid of this 1 mana minion, and take out something much better than it. So that's the pick here. These cards, pretty iffy. Young Dragonhawk is terrible. Wind Fury, you don't want it. Wolf Rider, I'm getting kind of tired of people in Arena trying to use Wolf Rider as a 3 mana fireball for 3 damage. Yeah, you can do it, it's just not very good. Same thing with the 2-1 charging Murloc. I don't like that, and you can't really play it as an aggressive card in most decks because making a Face Hunter, trying to draft around a theme is really difficult in Arena. You can't really play aggressive decks because for aggressive decks to work, you have to have a ton of aggressive cards. And Arena gives you a mix. So you're going to pretty much guaranteed get some cards that are above 5 or 6 mana, and those are just too slow for an aggressive deck, so they don't work. Face Hunter doesn't work in Arena, generally. Now, Mech Whipper, on the other hand, is okay. We don't really have any mechs, but it's still a 2-3 oh wait, we do have a Mechanical Yeti. So if we do get any other mechs, or if we have Mechanical Yeti in the hand, it has the potential for the value there, but it's still a 2-3, which is okay. And that's going to be the choice. Just because of the stat value, but the added reduce mech cost by 1 is still an extra benefit. Here, Unstable Ghoul is okay. The problem is it's inconsistent, and your opponent will probably play around it, so it won't get as much value as you think it could in 9 out of 10 circumstances, especially in Arena. Frostbolt is very good, simply because it's 2 mana removal. We do already have 2 Flame Cannons, though, so I don't know if we necessarily need it. It's still a very, very good card. Dark Iron Dwarf is also a very, very good card, though. Allowing you to take a weak minion and trade it into a bigger one is a big deal. So would I rather have a 4 mana minion that kind of gives something the equivalent of a pseudo Frostbolt, as long as I'm trading another minion in, or would I rather have a Frostbolt? And it's not obvious. I think I might lean towards the Dark Iron Dwarf, though, simply because the early game, as long as you can put minions down on the board, it's not quite as important. It's more, if you get to the mid or late game, what do you do then? Are you going to have the staying power to beat every other control deck in Arena? And Frostbolt, it's just too low of a mana card to really pull that off. It'll get you to the late game, but it won't win you a game in the late game. Dark Iron Dwarf has the potential to really turn games around. So I'm gonna grab that one. I believe that is correct. Frostbolt is good, but I would consider Dark Iron Dwarf good plus or great. Yeah, I believe that argument is valid. Okay, here we have Explosive Sheep, which is interesting. We can play it as a 2 mana consecration to the entire board if we fall behind. Explosive Sheep for Mage is probably one of the better classes that can play with Explosive Sheep. I don't know if I want that, though. At the same time, I could do something like a 4 mana Cone of Cold, which won't hurt my own field, and will actually freeze them. So do I want like a half damage Blizzard or a half damage Flame Strike for the same mana cost? You know, if this was constructed and we were playing something like a Stall Fatigue Mage, I'd probably take the Explosive Sheep. Well, I'd probably take both, but I think I'll go with the Cone of Cold because it's more consistent. As you notice, as I'm drafting these cards, consistency is really important in Arena. It's also important in constructed, but if you have cards that are just going to be dead in your hand, that's a real problem, because you can't play them, because the board setup isn't right for you, and you're not going to be sitting there with 9 cards all the time like you do in constructed mode. So I'm going to take the Cone of Cold. It has the potential to freeze the enemy, which might actually allow us to push for the win, or might kill a couple minions, might bring them closer into range for fire blasting, that kind of thing. So yeah, we'll grab Cone of Cold. I think that's reasonable. Here we have 3 pretty decent cards, actually. We already have a Silverhand Knight and a few other 5s as well. We actually have 4 5s, which is kind of plenty. At the same time, though, we're really lacking on 2-drop minions, so I think here I'd put a slight favor on the 2-drops, especially since we have Fairy Dragon. Fairy Dragon versus Youthful Brewmaster. Youthful Brewmaster, in a deck like this that's just kind of generic, you can basically think of it as healing a minion for 2 mana plus the cost of the minion itself. Well, nearly, that's not fair. It's like you play a 2-drop, you heal it for the cost of the mana it takes to play it. So it's a slower card, obviously, but that's fine for Arena mode. Is there anything it could really benefit with? Dark Iron Dwarf is one. Harrison Jones, yeah. Silverhand Knight, sure. Sludge Belcher, yeah, arguably. Karen Bloodhoof, no, not really. It's actually kind of a toss-up between Fairy Dragon and Youthful Brewmaster, because Fairy Dragon's immune to spells, but how important is that, really? You know what? We actually have some good plays with Youthful Brewmaster with the mid to late game. So if we don't draw Youthful Brewmaster, it'll be more useful as the game goes on. And on turn 2, I'd say they're about equally useful. The only circumstance where Fairy Dragon's better is when they have a spell to remove it, they want to play it, and they can't. But if they're removing it, then they're not playing a minion. And if they're not playing a minion, then you're really under no threats. So it's just, okay, fine, whatever. Move on to turn 3. And that's fine with me, so I'll take a Youthful Brewmaster. Okay, these cards are actually very good. Flame Strike, obviously, is the card we were looking for this entire draft. To deal 4 damage to all enemy minions. If you've ever played Arena, you know mages use that card all the time, and that's how they win. Spider Tank is one of the best 3-drops, just purely because of stats. Acidic Swamp Ooze is very good because it destroys your opponent's weapon. We won't take the Acidic Swamp Ooze, one, because there aren't too many weapon classes that really get played all the time in Arena, but secondly, because we already have Harrison Jones, which you could kind of think of as a better version of Acidic Swamp Ooze. Spider Tank is good, and we don't have many 3-drops, but you can't pass up a Flame Strike, especially if you don't have one. It's just too good. It almost always gets 2 cards or more for one, so pretty much you get offered a Flame Strike, you take it. Here we have 2 really bad cards. Bad stats, weak Battle Cry. Maybe not terrible considering the average weapon you go up against is a True Silver Champion. So yeah, for 1 mana you do take out the second charge of True Silver Champion. But if you're going up against any deck that doesn't run weapons, those stats are just really bad. It becomes a Gold Shire Footman. And 1 attack for 2 mana is pretty iffy, and it's unlikely you're going to have friendly minions all the time to buff anyway. So we're taking Sludge Belcher, which is one of the best cards, of course. Magma Rager, already explained, sucks. Loot Hoarder is pretty good. The reason for that is it draws a card even if they kill it, and you might be able to use it to trade into an enemy 3-2. Dragonling Mechanic, as I mentioned, the stat lineup isn't exactly beautiful. I mean, you technically have 4 or 5 of stats there, but one of the mechanical Dragonling is really easy to kill, and the 2/4 isn't that hard to deal with. You can play around the fact that the stats are distributed poorly. So it's actually not an amazing card. Loot Hoarder fills the gap that we need for 2-drops. Okay, and now it wants to give us more 2-drops, all Mage cards. That's interesting. These are all actually pretty good picks, and you will frequently see them in a constructed Mage. Sorcerer's Apprentice is not as good in this deck generally, just because we don't have that many spells. I count 5, counting the secrets, which, you know, is actually a reasonable amount. 6 because of the Cone of Cold. But I just don't know about that. It's a good minion, probably one of the better 2-drops, definitely. But would I take that over the ability to freeze my opponent and not allow them to use a Druid's hero power, not allow them to swing with a True Silver Champion? I think I wouldn't. I think I would rather freeze the characters or enemy champions, or heroes rather. And a Mana Worm, it's a pretty good one-drop actually, and 2 Flame Cannons does help that. The problem is, what if you don't have a Flame Cannon or a Flame Cannon target? Then it's still a 1/3, which is okay stats. At the end of the day, though, I do think I go for the Snow Chugger here. It's not obvious. It does have a little bit of synergy with Mech Warper. I actually wouldn't blame you, considering the deck lineup, 6 spells, if you did choose a Mana Worm, but I'm going to take the Snow Chugger. Okay, here. Things that heal you up are not very important in Arena. Gaining 8 armor is actually quite bad in Arena. You're not trying to stall the game, you're trying to run your opponent out of resources before they run you out of resources. So we pass an Ice Barrier pretty much all the time. Jungle Panther is an okay 3-drop. Problem is not enough health, really. But you do get to pick trades, and the ideal scenario is you get to run this into a 1/4, but that's not going to happen too often. Darkscale Healer is basically a Yeti with the ability to heal allies. Because we probably will have some allies on the board who are damaged and can get healed with that, I'm actually going to take that. Darkscale Healer, I actually believe, is a pretty good card in Arena. Good, not great, not amazing, but good. Okay, here we have 3 pretty decent cards. Abusive Sergeant, if you want to play like Zoo, give a minion +2 attack. Same thing as Dark Iron Dwarf. The problem is the stat lineup is not nearly as good. It dies to 1 mana hero powers, and not nearly as good as Dark Iron Dwarf. Frostbolt is good because, of course, it freezes and deals 3 damage, which means it can pretty much remove most 2 or 3 drops. And Sorcerer's Apprentice is good because it's a 3/2 that also has benefits inside of this deck. Once again, the choice is not obvious. Well, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 minions. That are 2-drops, and 2, 3, 1-drop minions. That's actually pretty okay for the early game. I think I might take the Sorcerer's Apprentice, because what I imagine is that the scenario where you have 2 2-drop minions might actually happen. So then you play a 2-drop minion like a Loot Hoarder. They play a response like another minion to try to kill your Loot Hoarder or trade, whatever, just putting down minions. Then on turn 3, you drop the Sorcerer's Apprentice and do a 1-mana Flame Cannon. If I could take both of these, I probably would. I think, though, I'm going to slightly lean towards the Sorcerer's Apprentice. At the end of the day, Frostbolt is usually used to take out a 2-drop, or at best a 3-drop anyway, so basically serves the same purpose as running a Sorcerer's Apprentice into something else, but then you have the added benefit of spells costing 1 less, so I'll go ahead and grab this. There are circumstances, of course, where Frostbolt is better, like when you need to freeze a minion as well as dealing damage, or you have spell damage. Here we have Wolf Rider, which is really bad, Mana Worm, which is pretty good. Mage minions are usually pretty good for this for their mana cost, and Chillwind Yeti, which is one of the definitions of a value 4-drop. I think you might go with the Chillwind Yeti here because out of all the spells, only 2 are actually 2-drops. So, but they're really good 2-drops, and then you can have a 2/3 on turn 2 in addition to frying their minion. If I actually drafted 2 of those Frostbolts, I might consider the Mana Worm, but Chillwind Yeti just has too good of a stat lineup, and the late game or mid game is more important anyway. Harvest Golem, Water Elemental, or Arcane Missiles. Arcane Missiles, it's random, so it can screw you over. It's not quite as good as you might think. If I had an Archmage Antonidas, it would be a real consideration, but compared to Harvest Golem and Water Elemental, I can't really just pass that up like that. Harvest Golem, usually I would immediately pick Water Elemental, but something to keep in mind is we actually have no 3-drop minions. Is that important enough to justify the Harvest Golem over a Water Elemental? I don't quite think it is. Problem with Harvest Golem is it doesn't do much damage for a 3-drop, and yeah, you get 2 bodies with it, but it's not too hard to play around with it. If they run something that's like a 3/4 spider tank into it, then your Harvest Golem's main body died, and then all of it they need to do is use a dagger or Mage hero power to finish it off. But most times you just ignore things that have death rattle like this. Like, if your opponent's playing too many weak death rattle minions that are just value in the sense that they're resistant to AoE, you can just ignore them and go for your opponent's face, and then they have to trade. And if you're the one who has to trade, not always that great. But Water Elemental just has amazing bloody stats for a 4-drop. Really good at trading, really good at freezing your opponent's True Silver champions. Or big creatures of your opponents as well. It's just a very, very good card. It's hard to pass up on that. But the Harvest Golem is good as well. Okay, here we have more 5-drops and 4-drops, which is not exactly ideal. Or we could play a Loot Hoarder, which gets us an extra card, and card draw is actually pretty good. Do we want weak minions that basically are going to do a little bit, but then draw a card? So that's kind of like cycling a card. I don't know. I think it might be kind of a weak pick, actually, because if you play too many 2-drops, your hand's going to be full of 2-drops. They can ignore your 2-drops and go for your face. You have to trade everything into their big Ironbark Protector or something like that. And it's not really ideal, though the Silver Hand Knight doesn't really fix that problem as well. Having a Silence in Arena isn't bad, but most people don't really have that many buffs. The people who are going to have buffs are going to be like a Paladin. And if they're going to be playing Blessing of Kings, I think I'd rather have like a Big Game Hunter than a Silence necessarily. Plus, on top of that, when they buff it up and trade with one of your minions, you can just throw another spell at it. You don't need to use a Silence on it, because it'll be down to like 3 or 4 HP. I think maybe we do take another Silver Hand Knight just because it's such an efficient card, and efficiency usually does win an arena. We could arguably use a little bit more card draw, but Loot Hoarder, it's not that strong of a card draw. It usually just dies to a Mage hero power, so I'll grab the Silver Hand Knight. Here we have another Elven Archer, which is weak, and T-Killbot, which is good and constructed, but weak in arena. Because you don't really need to heal your hero as much. It's not the worst consideration, because there are times when you're playing against aggressive decks, or you fell really behind and you need a way to heal yourself. But a better strategy is just not to fall behind. Instead of curing the problem, just prevent it in the first place. But here, I think I'll grab a duplicate. Because it's basically more card draw, I can use that in the later game. Maybe get some more Sludge Belchers, which would be godlike. Cairn Bloodhoof clones, Ventrico Mercenary clones. Those would be ridiculously amazing. Even a Harrison Jones clone might be really good against a Paladin. Water Elemental clones. Yeah, it has the potential to be really good. Leper Gnome is weak in arena because you're not trying to rush your opponent down 9 out of 10 times. Water Elemental is really freaking good, but Mirror Entity, we already have too many secrets. At this point, I wish I could grab a Mad Scientist or two. But yeah, we're not going to take more 3-drop secrets. That was actually ridiculous if we get more. Mirror Entity is not bad, but 3rd Water Elemental, cannot argue with that. Last card. 2 good picks and a really bad pick. Molten Giant is bad because your opponent is going to be ignoring your HP until they've run you out of stuff. That's just how control works, and Arena is all about control and value. Sea Giant is really good because both sides of the field are typically going to be playing a lot of minions, and a lot of minions means a lot of Sea Giant value. Getting it out for 4 or 5 mana can turn a game. There aren't that many BGHs in Arena, so you don't really have to worry about that so much. Piloted Sky Golem is also great for the same reason as Piloted Shredder. Summon a random forecast minion when it dies. So it's like the equivalent of, okay, I'm going to play a crappy 6/4 5-drop, and then I'm going to get a Sinjin on top of that. So you can kind of think of it like Cairn Bloodhoof, except it's a little bit more randomized. Cairn Bloodhoof is nice because you know what you're going to get out of it, and what you're going to get out of it is another Yeti, which is never a bad thing. So between those 2 cards, it's actually a little bit tough. The thing about Sea Giant is you can get tempo with it, and putting down a Sea Giant for 4 or 5 mana really turns the game around. Piloted Sky Golem is slightly ignorable by your opponent, but it's consistent and it's also inconsistent. It's consistent because it's going. You put it down on turn 6, it's going to be really good. Same as Savannah Highmane, same as Cairn Bloodhoof, but you don't know what you're going to get out of it, and you can play around it. It only has 4 HP. Tough toss-up. I think I like the Sea Giant more here, though. Just because of the nature of Arena. So let's see. 3 mana on both sides of the field would make a 4 mana Sea Giant. Would that happen likely? Not really. You'd be looking at more like a 5 mana Sea Giant. The 5 mana 8/8 or 6 mana 6/4 that has a Death Rattle effect, I think you would want the Sea Giant, that being the case. So I will grab the Sea Giant. Is that right? The problem is, what if both sides of the field try to trade a lot? It's not so obvious, actually. If both sides of the field trade a lot, which is actually pretty common in Arena, because both sides are trying to control each other, that Sea Giant might end up being more like a 8 mana minion. Which in that case, a piloted Sky Golem would be better. Then you throw out the Mech Warper. Plus, a Sea Giant can be removed, and if they have a Settle with Death, they'll use it. Control decks would normally draft one. Oh, you know, it's really freaking tough. Really, really tough. Actually, I'll see what the internet says about that. So, piloted Sky Golem is considered great, as is Sea Giant. So both of them are pretty much at the same thing. But ADWCTA has piloted Sky Golem listed at 88 value versus 86. Yeah, they're both really good, and they're very close in how good they are. I think, though, Sea Giant might be a little bit less consistent. Even though the random Death Rattle effect, you know you're getting something out of that Death Rattle. The only way to counter piloted Sky Golem is to ignore it, or to basically silence it, or polymorph it. And there aren't that many removals that do that kind of thing. It's going to be more like a Fireball plus running a minion in, or a Assassinate, or using a Frostbolt plus a Ping and then running a minion in. I'll take the piloted Sky Golem. Okay. So looking at this deck, I think it is actually pretty solid. We got some early game. I think that around the amount of early game you want is something between, I would say 7 and 10, or 7 and 9, 2 and 1 drop minions. So you got 3 1-drops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 drops, plus 2 flame cannons. So that comes out to 10 1 and 2 drop cards, which is actually really good, especially considering 2 of those are spells. So we'll almost certainly have minions to play, and we will almost certainly have a pretty good early game, especially if we get like a turn 3 Sorcerer's Apprentice into Flame Cannon. That would be sick and really put pressure on the opponent. As far as 3 drops go, the 3 drops are abysmal. We have 3 secrets. You don't really want to play a secret on turn 3. You want to play it when you know you can get good effect out of it. You want to play it in certain circumstances. And turn 3 is not going to be that circumstance. You don't want to clone a 2-drop, and you don't want to steal a 3-drop, really. But if you have to do it, you can. The upside is that we still have more 1-drops and 2-drops we can play in addition to that. Possibly it'll be a turn 3 1-drop plus a ping, and that's fine. Using the Mage Hero power is good. But yeah, that's probably the main weakness of the deck right there, having only secrets for 3 drops. And as far as 4 and 5 drops go, we are solid. We have Cone of Gold, which is okay. It's AoE, it freezes. Not the best card, but what we do have is Truant Yeti, Dark Iron Dwarf, Mechanical Yeti, 3 Water Elementals. You can't really ask for a better lineup than that. That is pretty much the best 4-drop cards you can get for a mage. Darkscale Healer is pretty good, in my opinion. Horace and Jones, good versus Paladins, so that helps you in one matchup. And then Silverhand Knights and Sludge Belchers, as in addition to a Ventricle Mercenary, are all very good picks. Pretty sure to make you have a strong mid-game, especially considering those 4 drops. If you have a good early game, you're going to have a great mid-game, and unless your opponent also has a great mid-game, you're just going to crush them. But then you get into the late game, and you have Cairn Bloodhoof, which is sick. Piloted Sky Golem, which is sick, and 1 Flame Strike, which is probably close to the best mage card in Arena mode. Those are really, really good. So the 4s, 5s, and 6s are all really, really good. You combine that with duplicating these guys, that's a big deal. You want that. So if duplicate can be played effectively, then that's going to be really good mid to late game. Really good. Just that turn 3 weakness, it's not going to be that big of a deal, but it's not a perfect deck. I think this deck will actually go around 10 wins, I would say. Could it be 12 wins? I think it could be 12 wins. It's a good deck. So, thanks for watching. What I'm going to do is play through it, and I will have highlights of everything to show you guys. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that.